All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're just about ready to start the next talk. We're going to be hearing from David Shoebridge. He's a Greens member of the New South Wales Legislative Council. We do like the Greens around here. And he's going to talk about something that we don't like around here, which is sniffer dogs. So if everybody could give a round of applause, David Shoebridge.
All right, well, first of all, it's lovely to be here on Aboriginal land, and I'll pay my respects to those elders past and present of the land we're meeting on here today. Nimbin has a gorgeous, gorgeous history prior to a bunch of whitefellas turning up 200 years ago, and it's remembering that history. And you look around, you get that deep sense of place, that deep Aboriginal presence that is still here in Nimbin. And when we're talking about drugs, we're talking about police powers. I think we need to remember that Australia's first people are often at the brunt of the abuse and the overuse of police powers. And when you're talking in terms of police powers and the policing of drugs in New South Wales, in fact, probably around the country, one of the most obvious ways that the state and the populace interacts when it comes to drugs is through drug dogs. And there's been, just in the last decade and a half, the development and the expansion of drug dogs as the most overt form of policing, particularly cannabis, but also other recreational drugs. And for many young people, they probably think that they were always there, that there were always police drug dogs on the street, always police drug dogs out the front of music festivals, always police drug dogs surrounding Nimbin. It's not the case. And in fact, they only began as a presence in New South Wales in 2001. And in 2001, we had then a Labor Premier, I think a guy called Bob Carr, wanted to talk about getting tough on drugs, wanted to talk about a law and order regime, and he was convinced by the New South Wales Police that the way of doing that was to put a bunch of dogs on the street. Put a bunch of dogs on the street so that Middle Australia can actually see the police are doing something in the war on drugs. In 2006, the New South Wales Ombudsman did a review of the effectiveness of drug dogs. And that review was damning of drug dogs. The review found that there were false positive rates of drug dogs which greatly exceeded their accurate rates. In fact, dogs get it wrong most of the time, and I'll take you to the stats in a bit about just how wrong the dogs are. The evidence found that there almost nobody was being found with an indictable quantity of drugs on them. That at best people were getting cautions, people getting warnings, that it was a waste of police resources. So what did the government do? Well, of course, it expanded the police drug dog regime. And in 2012, they greatly expanded the police drug dog regime, put it all over public transport across the state, opened up large parts of cities of Sydney, Wollongong and Newcastle to the operation of drug dogs. And what results did they get? Well, you can see here on the left-hand side the number of searches. These are the number of searches that were done in New South Wales following a positive indication from a drug dog. And you'll see in 2007, just after the Ombudsman's report said how hopeless they were, it went up from just under 8,000, and now each year it ticks away to just a bit under 18,000 times a year. People are being identified by a drug dog as having drugs on them. They're being stopped on the street. They're being surrounded by 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 police. And they're being patted down, they're being searched, they're having their bags spilt out. It's a form of ritual humiliation. And if anyone's been in the presence of somebody who's been singled out by a dog, identified by a police officer, and then patted down and searched, you'll realise just how humiliating it is. And my office is regularly contacted by people who have been getting the train to work in Sydney. And the drug dogs can go through the trains now in Sydney. They go through the trains, the dog stops next to somebody on the train. It could be their regular commute. They're dragged off at the next platform. They're pulled onto the middle of the platform. Their possessions are tipped out of their bag on the street, onto the platform. They're surrounded by police. They're patted down and they're searched. And for many of them, it's one of the most humiliating moments in their life. For many young people, it's deeply confronting. For Aboriginal people, it's kind of just part of everyday life. That's what they expect. But for all people, that kind of affront to your civil liberties, where the police can drag you out of the crowd, pull you off a train, pull you off the street, and perform that kind of intrusive, humiliating public search, surely you'd say that they must have some pretty good evidence to do that. They'd have to have pretty strong grounding before we'd be letting police do this 18,000 times a year. But no, the police are only meant to be able to conduct a search of you, even when they've got a drug dog, when they've got a reasonable suspicion that you're carrying drugs. Not that you smoked drugs 2 weeks ago, or 3 days ago, or that you went to a party where people smoked pot. The police need to have a reasonable suspicion that you've got drugs on you at the time that they undertake the search. And the police say because a dog sits down next to you and looks at you, which is what they're trained to do when there's a so-called positive indication, they rely upon that as their reasonable basis to conduct a search. And we know that they're getting it wrong between 60% and 75% of the time. So 2 out of 3 times, or sometimes 3 out of 4 times, depending on the year, the police are getting it wrong. They're far more likely to not find drugs on you than to find drugs on you as a result of a drug dog indication. So you've got to ask yourself, is that actually a valid exercise of the police's search powers? When they know for a fact that before they even begin the search, before they even start looking, that they're most likely going to be wrong and that the dog has got it wrong. Well, we would say not. That hasn't yet been tested in the courts though. And we've been accumulating this data now over the last 4 years through questions in Parliament on notice. These are the official police figures. And the official police figures prove that the police don't, just simply on the basis of a drug dog indication, have any kind of valid, reasonable grounds to think that you have drugs. In fact, it's far more likely that you don't have drugs on you than you do when a drug dog sits down next to you and does an indication. And the police know that. But it doesn't stop them. They use their powers, they humiliate people, and they're getting it wrong 10, 11, 12,000 times a year. But you say, well, surely they must, in those small little green bar, they must be getting a whole lot of serious drug dealers, because why else would we be spending millions of dollars of taxpayers' money on this drug dog program? Well, I'm going to show you, this is the best set of data ever supplied for the efficacy of police drug dogs. This is in 1 year. This is the police's own data. They say that in 1 year, of all 17,746 searches they did, after a positive drug dog indication, they found enough drugs to lay a supply prosecution, a successful supply prosecution, in 2.4% of cases. That's the best year ever. When the Ombudsman did his review, he found that there was a successful supply conviction in 0.6% of occasions when there were positive indications. And the police don't like collecting this data, and their data's very patchy because it keeps showing things like this, a seriously failing drug dog program. And of course, the majority of those, when we ask the police to break down the data further and tell us what was the nature of the supply charge that you got, they say we don't keep that data and we don't link that data to the drug dog program. Anecdotal reporting suggests that the overwhelming majority of even those supply convictions are for very small amounts of drugs under deemed supply charges, five ecstasy pills, a few joints of cannabis, very small deemed supply charges. And the reason is, serious drug dealers aren't catching the train. They're not walking up and down the streets of King's Cross. They're not wandering into a music festival with pockets bulging full of drugs. They're doing those deals in Double Bay. They're doing those deals in a hotel suite in Byron or Ballina. They're doing the deals well away from where they know the police are, and that the only people the police are catching on the streets are really small-time, small beer kind of stuff. But if that kind of ritual humiliation on the streets and on train stations isn't enough, you'll be pleased to know that the New South Wales Police are willing to take it one step further. And they do strip searches. So when they've humiliated someone on a platform or on the public street and they haven't found anything and they don't like the look of them, the police then, between 500 and 750 times a year, between 500 and 750 times a year, depending on which year, and they tend to be doing it more often than not of late, they will take that person who they've found no drugs on, they'll take them into either the police station, or if you're at a music festival, they'll often have some sheds set aside at a music festival, or at a train station, they'll have a room set aside at a train station. They'll take them across and they'll get them to strip down naked, they'll get them to squat over a mirror, and they'll look up their backside and other orifices and they'll hunt for drugs. And what do they get? Well, again, the overwhelming majority of the time, they find nothing. And they know that the strip search that they're undertaking will, between 67 and 61% of the time, yield no drugs at all. The person they're about to cause that appalling humiliation, embarrassment to is vastly more likely not to have drugs on them than to have drugs on them. And if you think about the kind of affront that is to an individual, not only have you been dragged off the street by the police, and when police are operating at music festivals, the police's own standard operating procedures say that they have 12 police operating for every drug dog. 12 police for every drug dog. So when you see 5 drug dogs at a music festival, feel comforted that those 5 drug dogs are going to actually be accompanied by 60 police. What an extraordinary use of resources. And of course, the police then know that they've got people who are relatively intimidated, they've got people who aren't asking questions, they're surrounded by police and dogs, they're dragged off, they're humiliated. 99 times out of 100, they're so mortified by what happened, embarrassed by it, they put their clothes on and they go about their business and just try and pretend nothing had happened. But what a great way to start your music festival. Why is nobody else asking about this gross misuse of police resources? Why is nobody else concerned about the fact that you can have 60 police and 5 dogs at a music festival ritually humiliating, embarrassing and violating people in this way, and all to find, at best, in 2.4% of cases, enough drugs to do a deemed supply conviction? But the overwhelming number of occasions, they're finding nothing, they're destroying relationships with key communities, and we've got police, instead of out there looking for violent crime, tracking down murderers and people engaged in sexual assault, protecting people from domestic violence, we've got police doing this kind of crap. So what search powers do police have when they're using these drug dogs? Well, as I said before, police only have the power to search you, even with a drug dog, if they have a reasonable suspicion that you're carrying drugs on you at the time. Is a drug dog indication alone enough? Well, the police have recently changed their standard operating procedures to say that when they perform a search after a drug dog stops, that they're not just relying upon the drug dog. No. They're also relying on a variety of other secret police intelligence that they're not going to tell us about. Well, we kind of think we know what that secret police intelligence is, that the guy was in a hoodie, that he was a young Aboriginal bloke, that you're in Nimbin, that you're on Redfern Railway Station in Sydney. The usual prejudice that we see for that kind of excessive use of police powers. And police cannot force you to answer any questions during these drug searches. They will pepper you with questions. Where have you been? When did you last smoke? You've been to a party, haven't you, where you've had drugs? We know you take drugs. We've got the drug dog here. Tell us when you last took drugs. Your mate's taken drugs, don't you? They'll pepper you with questions. And remember, you're fairly isolated. You're surrounded by maybe 12 police. You've got a couple of dogs around you. You're really on your back foot. And it's our natural inclination to just answer them. Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, look, yeah. Maybe a week ago I was at a party where there was some cannabis, maybe. Every time you do that, the police write a little note. Yes, drug dog was accurate. There were positive indications of drugs, and our program is effective. And they rely upon that scared anecdotal reporting to produce anecdotal responses to seek to justify their drug dog program. And they say, oh, even though our dogs are not finding drugs the majority of the time, we know from anecdotal reporting that the people that we've bailed up on the street have been at parties where they had drugs. And therefore, our dog is super effective because they picked up the trace of marijuana from 3 months ago when the guy was at a party. It's that kind of, no other word for it other than bullshit justification that the police give to continuing their drug dog operation. And I stress, you don't have to answer any of the police questions. And you should say to the police when they're peppering you with questions, am I compelled to answer this? Am I directed to answer this? Am I forced by law to answer this? When they say no, you say, thanks, and stand your ground. And of course, searches should always, wherever possible, be conducted by an officer of your own gender. When they're conducting that search, when they're conducting the search on the street, police are not allowed to grope at your genitals, not allowed to grope at your private parts. That doesn't mean they don't, but they're not allowed to. And again, you should insist upon the search happening from someone of your own gender. And during a strip search, they're not allowed to touch you at all. They're not allowed to touch you at all. So what to do when you're confronted in one of those search situations? And I've got to stress to you that it's a seriously disempowering moment. Even myself, I've been a lawyer and a barrister for the better part of 20 years. MP, when you get surrounded by police and they start having a go at you, you know that you're an individual and they're the state. And it's quite confronting. So ask the police what information you are required to give them and only provide that. Throw it back at the police. Say, am I required to tell you this? Do I have to give you this information? And you don't have to give them any information at all. If they do find drugs on you, you then need to give them your name and your address, but nothing else. But if they don't find any drugs on you, you don't have to give them anything. But always be polite. And the other thing to do is write down the details of what happened. Record the interaction you had with the police at the time. Record what they said to you. And if you've got a friend there with a mobile phone, ask them to step away about 3 or 4 metres, well away from what's happening, and to record it on video on the mobile phone. Don't interfere with the search. Consciously don't interfere with the search. In fact, you get a better shot if they're 3 or 4 metres away from you. It's a better video in my experience. Get them to move 3 or 4 metres away and record it and video it. And you might find that you get an aggressive response from the police at that moment. They'll go up to your mate, they'll go up to your friend and say, what the F are you doing? Turn it off. Well, the response needs to be, I have every right to do this. You can't touch me. You can't direct me to stop filming you. You're a police officer engaged, you say in your lawful duties, I have every right to film you. And I'm not going to interfere with your search. I don't want to be near your search. But I am going to record this. You may find that then escalates and the police then push and grab your phone off you or grab your friend's phone off you. Let them have it. Let them have it. Don't engage in any physical altercation with them. And then go and see a lawyer. Contact my office. Contact your community legal service. Because if it's been recording all this time, you've got some pretty good grounds upon which to bring a civil action against the police. You have every right to film them in public, going about their duties. You have no right to interfere with their search and their operations. Don't do that. But you've got every right to film them, and you should. Because I've got to tell you, the mobile phone is the single best police accountability device that we've got. Make sure you use it. And I would always stress that when the dog comes and they start to and it sits down, the police then pull you across and they begin the search, very clearly tell them, I don't consent to this. Are you directing me to do this? Because I'm not doing it by consent. And then they'll direct you and you say, okay, I will do what you tell me, but I can tell you now I'm not consenting to it. Because if you consent to a search, you've just given up a whole bundle of legal rights if they actually do find something. So make sure you don't consent to the search. But again, comply with the police directions, because otherwise you'll find yourself up on the trifecta. Resist police, offensive language, and resist arrest. So comply with directions, but make sure you don't consent. I said before that these kinds of discretionary police powers tend to be targeted against groups in our community. They tend to be targeted against poor people, against young people, against Aboriginal people, and against the LGBTI community. And I've got to tell you, when it comes to drug dogs, that's the group of people that police dogs are used against time after time after time. We've recently seen a massive expansion of the use of drug dogs on Sydney's and Newcastle's and Wollongong's public transport system. Literally thousands and thousands of police hours, millions of dollars of state money directed to putting more and more drug dogs on our public transport system. Who catches public transport? Well, we know tends to be more female than male, tends to be younger, tends to be poorer, picks up all the kind of communities that the police like policing. And despite this extreme diversion of police resources on public transport, the false positive rates on public transport are actually significantly higher than almost any other use of police drug dogs. They're getting it wrong 3/4 of the time consistently when they're searching on public transport. And that's probably because people are quite tightly packed together and the dog doesn't really know whether it's you or someone else who they've picked the scent up on. And despite the extraordinarily high false positive rates, the government has committed to spending yet more money expanding the number of drug dogs that they send on public transport. And if you want to see a nice little indicator of the racial bias of the use of drug dogs, you don't have to go past Redfern Station in Sydney. Now, many of you may not be familiar with Redfern Station. It's right near the centre of Sydney. Redfern Station accesses two key communities that the police like policing. One is young people going to Sydney University, and the other one is one of the largest Aboriginal communities near the centre of town. And the interaction between the local community and the police in Redfern has been a contested space, well, for at least 2¼ centuries. It continues to be a contested place. And a passenger getting off the train at Redfern is 6.5 times more likely to be searched after a drug dog indication than a passenger getting off at Central, just one stop further down. There's no evidence to suggest that a passenger getting off at Central is going to be more or less likely to be carrying drugs. And indeed, on the searches, on the data that we've got from the New South Wales Police, the police are getting a higher false positive rate. They're getting it wrong more often at Redfern than they are at Central or King's Cross or any of the other city circle stations, yet they continue to massively over-police Redfern Station. When we ask them to justify it, we get told it's an operational decision. Well, I've got to tell you, it's pretty obvious why they're over-policing at Redfern. It's because where they've traditionally over-policed, it's because where they can find large communities of Aboriginal people and young people, and they're the people they like targeting with their drug dogs. And of course, the LGBTI community has also been a traditional target of these kind of police powers. And we see year after year at Mardi Gras, hundreds and hundreds of police, packs of drug dogs being used because it's the community that police traditionally like to police with their drug dogs. It's the LGBTI community. And when it comes to the summer music festivals, I think anyone who's been to a summer music festival knows that you're likely to be running the gauntlet of drug dogs on your way in and your way out. And the police know who goes to music festivals. Well, people they like policing, young people. This is the evidence that the police have provided us of the effectiveness of the New South Wales drug dogs. We actually asked the police twice now to give us all the studies and all the reports and all the analysis that they have of the effectiveness of their drug dog program. And that's a list of them there. They have no data, they have no reports, and they have no analysis themselves of the effectiveness of the drug dog program. Not a single thing. And indeed, all of the statistics that are in the public domain that have been obtained through questions on answer to Parliament, they've all come through my office and through my office asking those questions in Parliament. And I've got to also do a big call out to Unharmed too. I might say Unharmed have been terrific in terms of helping us crunch some of that data and look deeper into the data and get those kind of statistics like we see at Redfern. So I'd like to thank Unharmed for taking that data a little bit further. So what's our campaign against drug dogs? Why have we got a sniff-off campaign? We've got a sniff-off campaign because people are affronted by this use of police power. People find it confronting, and it's just downright wrong. We've been out with those. You might have seen them on the street, and I'd like to thank all the young Greens who are up here at Mardi Gras handing out our material. The young Greens have been terrific, got behind this campaign, handed out the Regrowth Festival, handed out at Stereosonic Festival. We've had forums in Redfern. We've had our material taken and used by students in universities around the rest of the country, and I'd encourage anybody to do that. You can go onto the Sniff Off website, you can go onto my website, anything you like, steal it, use it, do it in your own campaigns in your local areas. It's all free to a good home. And we've seen posters like this at Bathurst University, taking on and making the argument in their local communities. And we've got a party. So if anyone wants to come to our Sniff Off party, it's on the 30th of May. If you're back in Sydney, or if you want to come to Sydney for a Sniff Off party, we've got great support from Paul Mack. He's an ARIA award-winning dance music artist. In fact, he's written a nice piece on drug dogs, and we'll be launching that lovely little drug dog tune from Paul Mack, together with other artists who are coming forward and supporting and talking about the uselessness, the downright destructiveness of drug dog operations in New South Wales. What next? Well, let's scrap that 2001 Act. Let's end the criminal sanctions for drugs for personal use. Let's legalise, regulate and tax the supply of cannabis. Let's allow for people to grow their own for their own personal use. And let's do something maybe a little bit different. Let's have the state government establish its own drug regulatory body that does the kind of work that you've seen done by so many academics and doctors and campaigners here. Get the evidence together about what works and what doesn't when it comes to drug law reform. And maybe that can be a useful way of adding to the political campaign on drug law reform. So this has all been about drug dogs. You know, as a Greens MP, obviously the campaign on drug law reform goes well beyond drug dogs. But I've got to say, we've found it really useful to interrogate this abuse of taxpayers' money, this abuse of police powers, as a way of pointing out just how wrong-headed, how ineffective our current failing war on drugs are. And the remarkable thing, though, is that even when you present all this evidence, you still find the majority of politicians with their heads down, refusing to listen. Even when you give the police's own figures to them and point out how useless it is, it's like an article of faith in them. They want to be seen to be doing something on the war on drugs, because that's all drug dogs are. They want to be seen to be doing something. And they want to do it in a place that's not going to cause too much anxiety in Middle Australia. That's why they're at Redfern, that's why they're at music festivals, that's why they're targeting young people and the LGBTI community. Because in their eyes, the rest of Middle Australia will be left alone. The police can be seen to be doing something, and overtly being seen to be doing something on the street about the war on drugs. And let's not worry one iota about the damage that does between the police and those vulnerable communities who they need to be rebuilding trust with. And let's not worry, they say, about the waste of taxpayers' money, because it's actually about politics. It's not about helping people. It's not even about sensible policing. Thanks very much.
Okay, we've got a time for 2 quick questions.
Hi, David. I'm from Lismore, and you may or may not be aware when drug dogs were first being used, they were actually used in the foyer of Woolworths down in Lismore. And I was wondering who sniffed them off, because maybe it was Woolworths. And if you know any who did sniff them off, because they haven't been there for a very long time. My second question is, when somebody's being strip searched by a person of the opposite gender, I think there's a more complex question with LGBTI people that are having strip searches. If you could address that.
Yeah. Well, dealing with that last part first, you can only be stripped. The only person in the room with you when they're doing a strip search is someone of your own gender. So they can't have someone of the opposite gender in you. Is that complicated in terms of LGBTI community? Well, yes, of course it is. My best answer to you is that they should never be doing it in the first place. They should never be conducting that kind of ritual humiliation on you, no matter whether you're gay or lesbian, you're straight, you're male or female, because they know that 60-odd% of the time that ritual humiliation is for no effect. And of course, in 2.4% of cases at best, they might find something that they can get a supply charge on. It's an appalling misuse. You'll be pleased as well to know that the New South Wales Police are so convinced of the efficacy of their drug dog program that they've opened up a nice northern New South Wales drug dog operation, specifically designed to run up here in northern New South Wales. And they keep getting rotten results with it, so they keep trying to find new places to use their drug dog operation to try and justify their existence in the first place. And so they probably didn't get great results out the front of Lismore Woolworths, and so they're moving it around and trying to find somewhere where instead of having false positives of 90%, they might get real lucky and only get it wrong 6 out of 10 times. So that's the state of play for New South Wales policing.
I'm wondering if you're aware of what the situation is in other states, whether there's any more progressive legislation to do with sniffer dogs. And also, up here in Rainbow region, we have a lot of problems with police, sniffer dogs, roadblocks, and other mass police operations. I'm wondering if you know of anyone who's challenging the cost of these expeditions, because unlike sniffer dogs, you've only got the expense of training the dogs and having the copper there. What they do up here is that they hire helicopters at thousands of dollars a day. And they turn up with one bong, 2 kilograms deemed supply, and a couple of roaches or something like that. Can you comment on that?
Well, yeah, first of all, when it comes to asking details about funding for operational requirements, the police don't keep the data, and they consciously don't keep the data. So as when you ask for particular funds for an operation, you might remember the Bentley blockade. And we asked questions in Parliament about what was the cost, what was the police cost of the Bentley blockade, and we got told they can't provide us with the information, they haven't done the costing, it would be an unreasonable diversion of police resources to tell the public how much they spend on any individual operation. And in fact, time and time again, not just with the New South Wales Police, but with the government more generally, when they think one of their programs is contrafactual, when they think that the evidence doesn't support it, but they want to put some political support behind it, they deliberately don't collect the data. And that's not just for police operations, you'll find it across the board with the New South Wales government. So when there's no data there, it's a pretty good warning sign. My office is in the process of actually trying to do this sort of campaign, get this kind of evidence together about roadside drug testing, and particularly the saliva testing for cannabis use. It's really complicated. We're having a fight with the New South Wales Police under the Freedom of Information laws about getting details about what they test for, how they test it, what the evidence is to support the levels that they have for disqualifying drivers. That's going to be an ongoing process this year. I can assure you, as soon as we get sufficient evidence to mount a campaign, you'll be hearing from us, and we'll be putting the evidence in the public domain like we do with drug dogs. It's an ongoing struggle. It's an ongoing battle to hold this New South Wales government to account like it is around the rest of the country. In terms of police powers in other states look to New South Wales as the model that they want to adopt. And in fact, once New South Wales moved, we saw Victoria move, we've seen Queensland move. And that's why we've really got to wind it back here in New South Wales. That's why we've got to point out the illegitimacy. Because other police commissioners around the rest of the state love the drug dog program. Because if you go onto the New South Wales Police website, early on the New South Wales Police website, you'll find a couple of smiling, happy sniffer dogs. You know, aren't they lovely? Aren't they sweet? And the rest of the community who aren't being policed by them say, aren't they lovely, aren't they sweet? We all like police sniffer dogs. Which is why I might say we use the term drug dog, because it points out what they're doing. It's not just a gentle, calm, polite little sniff that they're giving. It's the start of a process that sees your civil rights seriously trampled. Thanks very much.
All right, another big round of applause for David Shoebridge.